Hey guys, so today I'm going to be going over my testimony and how I came to Christ, and I guess how I also kind of stayed with Christ, like continue to seek that path. And so to do so, we have to go back to kind of how I was raised because it's very pivotal in who I became. Unfortunately, like a lot of kids growing up these days, I was raised in an abusive household. My parents were dating and they were very, very devout Christians growing up and dating and being together. And then, unfortunately, due to a lot of circumstances and some unfortunate decisions, my dad ended up accidentally kind of falling away from Christ and giving into more of his flesh and more of his anger. And the thing that really set him off in growing up for me was like noise. Like if I made a sound that was too loud for him, then I got. And so I grew up being very fearful of making noise and being like in the way of. And for any of those who have worked with abused kids or have been an abused kid, it creates kind of like a defense mechanism in the child, and often the results in them being kind of like what I like to call like eternally zoned out. Like I was just so zoned out and so like in my head all the time. I would obliviously just like walk into walls and would not respond to half of what you'd say to me, and I was just kind of in my own world for a lot of it. And that's just an unfortunate side effect of that. But one thing is, my dad did have some weird punishments where if he didn't feel like beating me, he would send me to my room, and not only just my room, but he'd send me to my bunk bed. So when he grounded me, I wasn't grounded to my room, I was grounded to my the top bunk where I slept. And I wasn't allowed to leave there all day, not to eat, only to ever use the restroom because he didn't want to clean up any messes. So I got to use the restroom and that was it. And I was grounded to the top of my bunk, and if I ever left, I got beat. And I remember my mom would sneak me like little bananas and like a sandwich, and we were very poor growing up, so I mean, just whatever she could, she would, sacrifice her own meal sometimes just to come and feed me in secret. And so we went through that, and as I was growing up, my mom tried her best to expose me to Jesus, and she did that in mainly two ways that were like the most impactful on me. And one was the Salty tapes, which I still hold to this day, really helped me and was like my escape at night. And I'd listen to like, man, people won't know what these are, but like little cassette tapes. You stick them in a tape player, and you have to rewind them, and they have two different sides, and it's a whole ordeal. But you stick them in a special tape player, and they play songs and stuff. And you can't just pick the song. You have to like fast forward, like 10 minutes or 5 minutes. You have to go find your song. And I listen to these every single night. It's like my escape. And one song in particular, which is still influential to me to this day, is "Take My Life and Let It Be." And their rendition of it was really cool. I had some kids singing, had a little bit more guitar, like was more engaging for a child. And it was really impactful to me because it was like, not my life was just my own. It was my life was meant for more, like there's a greater purpose, take my life and let it be yours is the whole point of the song. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of your love, which is my favorite line of the whole song. And so that was really deep, and I would just listen to that on replay. Like I would be awake listening to the song, trying to fall asleep, but I want to listen to it again. So I'd like get up and rewind it, wait a few seconds to rewind, and then try to fall back asleep. And I do that every night. It was like my therapy to myself and between me and God, even though I didn't really know who God was yet. My mom tried to explain it to me, but growing up, like 3, 4, 5, don't really know God at all. But eventually at 5 years old, in June, my mom would let me watch VeggieTales growing up all the time. I know all of VeggieTales. I am an encyclopedia of VeggieTales knowledge. And during that summer, I guess I just wanted to watch the Easter Carol one. Now I'd seen it. I'm pretty sure I'd seen it before, but this time was something different. When I watched it, there's this character Hope, who is basically kind of like the guide for Nebuchadnezzar, or not Nebuchadnezzar. I guess it'd be Scrooge, the Scrooge character, because it's like the Easter Carol for like the Christmas Carol for Easter. Anyways, convoluted stories aside, Hope was like the guide for him through the whole movie, to help kind of kids understand and really grasp the kind of more complex story. And Hope sung the song at about a little over halfway during the movie, which kind of is a beautiful song about Jesus' life. And growing up with fear being like the biggest thing I knew, there was a line in that song that really stuck to me, and it hit me hard. And it's when Scrooge asks, if Jesus died on a tree, when she gets to the part where he died, he asks, well, what's the hope in him dying? And she says, well, if that was the end, there would be no hope. But it isn't. And it says that because Jesus rose from the dead, that he made a way, and that there's nothing left to fear. Nothing heaven knows. And that line, man, it hit me. there's nothing left to fear. I was like, what? So I asked my mom more about it, and more about Jesus, and more about like how that would, I don't know, I guess as much as a 5-year-old can ask, like, is that true, you know? And so I asked that, and she said, I mean, you have to accept him in your heart, like your own walk is yours. And so I wanted to accept him into my heart. And in a weird moment of clarity, I guess, my dad, having been, you know, really devoutly seeking God at one point in his life, actually wanted to be there to pray for his son to accept Jesus. And so both my parents prayed for me, and I got Jesus that night. Now I could say here, like, oh yes, it was the best sleep ever. I woke up and I was completely, you know, new and how different it was, but that would be both right and wrong. Because I didn't fall asleep being like, oh, everything's so new. I was more excited, you know, as a kid is, like, oh, what's going to happen? But I don't really remember anything from sleep. But I do remember is the very next day I woke up. And it was around probably 7:30, 8 when I woke up. And I went out into the kitchen, and my dad was preparing his lunch for the day, you know, for work, so he's going to make a little sandwich to bring for work. And I remember, abused, made a noise, slap, sent to my bunk bed, walked up to my father and asked him to make me breakfast. Now you could say that I was just out of my mind or whatever, but what I'm trying to emphasize here is, for some reason, just that really survival fear, I didn't have it anymore. And I did have other problems I had to work through in life, but that one specifically thing, constantly being like death, like life or death thinking all the time, was gone. I walked up to my dad and I said, hey, can you make me breakfast? And he barked at me. He was like, oh, I'm making lunch, I can't. And he got his lunch again and ran out the door. But I remember that part of my childhood very vividly, because how different it was. I, from there, went and my mom began homeschooling me, and she really believes in homeschooling. And I watched more VeggieTales. I grew up with my sister, who was born in 2005, and she's been a big blessing in my life, big personality. And my mom raised us, but she could as a single mother. My grandmother, very influential in my life. Like, honestly, the kindest woman you'll ever meet. She can't harbor a grudge against anybody. She'll preach to the bank robber if she has to. And so I grew up, I was being homeschooled, and I absorbed information very quickly. And in homeschooling, you can kind of you can go at your own rate. If you're slower, you can go slower, but if you're faster, you can go faster and advance through grades quicker. And that was me for sure. And so I advanced through that, and as I was getting older, I started asking more kind of detailed questions. Like, I can only sense, what I see the world out of is from me. So do other people exist? And but I believe in God, and God created everybody. But did he create everybody for me? And as a kid, I would ask kind of detailed questions and things I didn't realize were not normal, but I'd ask, and I'd be curious on what the answer was. And then finally, after really kind of seeking out, am I the only being in this earth that's really real? I was talking to my mom, and she was talking about a lot of her life and what she'd been through before me, and a lot of the tragedies and the family, I guess, tragedies that she had to deal with growing up, and a lot of her life story and what it made her feel like, and what she had to see, and what her walk with God was at the time. And it clicked finally that there was a lot of life before me. There's life for me now, and there will be life after me. And it helped me kind of gauge that, and that God made me, and I am special, but he also made everybody else, and they're special too. Which is really foundational in setting up kind of my views in life, as I am very justice and right and wrong orientated. You can ask anybody I know, I kind of have a tendency to see everything in black and white. I very hardly see things in the gray. And that's probably some from my abusive childhood. I still have some tendencies there from that, but at the same time, it's also just an outlook I have. So I advanced through homeschooling in my school very, very quickly. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, which also kind of explained the quick school. So I advanced through that, and I knew God. I mean, I never really doubted. I never had any problems. And eventually I tested out of 6th and 7th grade. I started high school, and I completed 4 years of my high school in 2 years. And then I got into college. I tested into my college. And just before you ask, just because I was homeschooled does not mean I did struggle in college. The auditory, having somebody teach you in a more of a classroom setting, was new, for sure, because I mostly learned from books. But I adapted quickly, and I got it. My homework, homework was the easiest part, and that's a lot of college, right? Mostly it's homework. So I did that, and I liked it. It was different, it's different being around that kind of group of people. You had people who were, smoking drugs the whole time, not really caring. You had the people who were really intense because they were going to go off and be engineers, and mostly tech people. I knew a lot of people who were going into computer classes. And I remember I'd try to minister to people. And I'd be talking to them some about Jesus after class or in between classes. I'd be trying to discuss like my views in Jesus and why or why not people, around me agreed with Jesus or not. And it was really interesting. It was like kind of a, like a melting pot, like college is, of different outlooks of people coming from various different areas and how they view life. And a lot of them not religiously, like a lot of them not having that exposure that I had. So that was a big learning experience. And I tried talking up, not shoving it down their throats, but just trying to have the conversation of, okay, well, why? Why not? Here's why I do. What about you? And then they'd ask me, like more about what my thoughts are. And I became kind of more infamous on my college campus because I was the 13-year-old on college campus, and I definitely looked it. Oh my gosh, I had like, think of the old Justin Bieber, like shaggy bowl, like long hair and everything, and, like 5'4", short, very 13-year-old looking kid. And so people would be talking to me, and I'd be discussing all these big Jesus things in college classes and all that, and they'd be just kind of interested. So they'd mostly talk to me, I think, out of curiosity, but it was still nice and fun to learn about. I think the next big part of that is when I hit about about a year into college, about 14 years old, I started really questioning my faith. Like most people do when they really, when they're raised a certain way, they'll start questioning it. And that's completely natural progression, right? Like, why? You start asking, like, why do I believe this? Is it just because my parents said so? And so I hit 14, and being the kind of more analytical person I am, I really delved into it, and I started studying like apologetics, like the evidence for Christianity. I started studying kind of the Bible more itself, because there's a lot of vernacular in there that kind of bugged me and I didn't know about, like, well, why do we call Jesus Christ in the first place, which weirded me out. And like, okay, well, that means Savior. Well, if he saved us, what does it mean if we sin or if we don't sin, and why does it matter? Or, does it matter? Here's why or why not. I asked my mom questions, right? And being the Christian woman she is, she would answer them in a very Christian way, which bugged me, weirdly enough. Like, she would say, oh, asking questions is a good way to grow. And I was like, grow? Ugh, what a Christian word. And I don't know. I was in my own teenage angsty world, but I was asking these questions, and the vernacular of it kind of bugged me because I was trying to look at it from an outside perspective. I can't tell you that there's any one definitive moment that I just finally decided that, yes, I'm a Christian, God is God, but I do remember spending a lot of time thinking about it and really thinking about the ins and outs of it. And I think finally, a lot of the evidence that I had read in apologetics, a lot of the real world events of people being healed miraculously, you don't realize how many miracles happen every single day for people. And sometimes out of the kindness of their hearts, other people's hearts, but other times it's inexplicable. And it really made me think, like people talk about that there's no evidence for Christianity, and they ask, like show us this evidence. But as I was looking, there's the thought process and the evidence for God is a lot higher than you'd think. And more than that, his character, I think, was the biggest one for me. It wasn't that just, okay, cool miracles, okay, cool healings, or maybe, like, okay, we can prove because of Jehoshaphat that Jesus existed. It was that God was a loving, omni-loving God. That was really the driving factor for me. Because Christianity, if you didn't know this, is the only religion on earth that has a savior. In every other religion on earth, it is a self-work program almost. You have to earn your way into heaven. Through acts of kindness, through self-growth, through various methods, but you earn your way to heaven. Like, you fight for it. You crawl your way to heaven. But in Christianity, you can't. In Judaism, you can't. So Christianity is the only one with a savior, that somebody else pays the price for you. And that begs a very important question. Why? Why did he do that? Because that's the most important part when it comes down to it, is if he did it just to have us as slaves, then him being an omni-powerful God and, an omnipotent God can just do that at any time, right? Just snap his fingers, maybe just wipe us away and, start anew. But he didn't. He kept the laws that he'd been maintaining, watched the people he'd been helping, the Israelites, and he sent his son to go die for everybody on earth, though. He had this one group of people that he even loved, like, those were God's people. When he sent Jesus down, he didn't just die for them, though. He didn't just take upon their sins. He took upon everybody's, including us now. He took everything. He sacrificed himself for all of it. So then why? And that really got to me. It's like, okay, he must love me. That's the only thing I could think of. because an omnipotent God has no other reason to do it otherwise. And that's stuck with me ever since. And a lot of that time of reading a lot of apologetics in the Bible and stuff has stuck with me to this day when I have different doubts, or the enemy throws things at me, or even other people just ask me questions that actually are they are decent questions to ask and very thought-provoking. But even still, though, at 14 years old, accepting Christianity again, kind of like seeking it, like, all right, yes, this is real. I didn't really follow it. Now, I got a couple jobs. Like, I started working when I was from 14 on and stuff, but as much as, I did believe that God was real, never doubted his existence, I wasn't following that lifestyle. I wasn't reading the Bible at all, really. I wasn't spending my time just trying to keep up a relationship with God like you maintain any other relationship. I wasn't seeking it. And that came to kind of bite me in the butt when at 17 years old, I got my first girlfriend, which is, a big life-changing experience. And for any men out there know that women, they're not, I'm not going to say this like this, but it is a lot of work, right? And especially for your being first and not having much experience, I really had to work at it. I really had to focus on it. And it was a big, I wouldn't say distraction, but it was a big impact on my life, big focus to have. But unfortunately, she did not seek God in the same way that I would want to, and or did not really believe that same way. And call it desperation, call it maybe just excitement for having a girlfriend, call it what you will, though. I stuck with her and I really tried to preach to her. But unfortunately, also, we fell into sin. We fell into premarital acts that you should only do in marriage. And during this, and we dated for a year, and during this year, I would say it's probably the saddest year of my life. And I say that not because it's like I'm weeping for all this sin, but at the time that I was living through it, I took the sin that I was doing very personally. Like, I was personally attacking God. I felt, though, as if I was betraying somebody I loved. And being that, as I talked about, very black and white oriented, and knowing that I was doing the wrong thing, it's like having that knowledge of it, and it meaning so much to me, it's like, it hit me. And I wouldn't say I became like clinically depressed, as some would, or depressed where I wanted self-harm, but I was just depressed in a mild sense. Like, I was very deeply sad. And I was very angry at myself. And I was angry at a lot of people. I became very ornery. And that wasn't who I was, but it was just, I felt so bad. Like, I felt like I didn't deserve God. I felt like I had lost any good holdings I had with him, as if I had earned his love. And that's hypocritical to say. But at the time, growing up and not feeling like you're a very sinful person, and then all of a sudden falling into sin and living a lifestyle is wrong, it made me very sad. And living this out with her, eventually, some people would say, like, why didn't you just break up with her? And I'd be like, well, I did these acts, and growing up Christian, it's like, oh, well, I did this thing for marriage, so I must marry her. Like, this is my life now. Very young mindset, but it was what I had, and it's what I stuck with. And one thing, though, is that I remember one night, her and I were laying out on the hood of her car, looking at the stars, which is usually very romantic. But for me, I was just like, it's just very not who I normally am. And one thing to know is that my mom and God have a really awesome, intimate relationship that I envy almost. Like, my mom's just always talked to God and talked about God like he's the person in the room with us, and it's really cool. And one thing that they always had that she talks about is that you can be looking at the same star as her, and she'll see a shooting star that you don't. And it's like God sending like a message in a bottle when she can't really hear him or can't talk to him, or when times are hard. And the bottle always says, like, I love you. Like, the message is always, I love you. When she sees a shooting star that nobody else can see, it's saying, I love you. So we're laying out on the hood of the car, and I was just sitting there depressed, like, oh, I'm worthless, oh, I suck. In my own self-pity and my own craziness. I was laying there, and I saw a shooting star. Like, her and I were looking at the same area, even, like the same constellation. And I saw a shooting star, and it was fast but bright. And I was like, oh, did you see that? And she said, no. And it took a second. I was thinking, it's like, wait. And I remember, like, my mom and all the stories she told me about all the times that God had done that for her. I knew it was God saying that he loved me. And when you're feeling like you are nothing, or you feel like you don't deserve anything, like you're bad, and God, who the person you feel like is the one you're wronging, reaches out and says, I love you. It's okay. I'll always love you. It hit me. It like floored me. It brought me to tears. And that was something I really needed during that time to get through that, is knowing that God loved me anyway, despite everything I'd done. And then a couple weeks later, I had to go on a business trip to Louisiana. And I brought a couple books with me. I was still in a bad mindset, but work focusing on work helped, and being away helped for sure. And while I was there, season was kind of slow. It was kind of hard, and I brought a couple books with me by a pastor I really like, Andrew Womack. And in one of those books, it was a book about kind of getting into those almost first steps, like what God's will is for you and what God wants for you and God's heart. And I guess one day I was, not to say bored, but my heart was seeking. So I started reading, and I read several chapters, and as I was getting into it, he talks about the parable of the seeds thrown out into the various types of soil. He talks about that's the most important parable in the whole Bible, because it's like the key. It's like if you can understand it, you can begin to understand really all of the parables. And he tells his disciples this even. And I was reading, I was like, ooh, and it's like a story, like I had to figure out what the key was. And I was reading, and he talks about that when Jesus says it, and he quotes what Jesus says, and then he says, this is what the key is. And before I preface, I do know that this will sound stupid, and that it won't hit you the same way it hit me, and that it was a total in that moment thing. But for me, what it hit me is what it said was, the key is the Word of God. Now, I grew up reading the Bible. I grew up in that kind of household. But it just hit me like, the Bible is literally God talking to me. It's literally the words of God wanting to communicate and tell me things that I didn't know that he wants me to know. It's the key to life, It's a key that everybody should read and really get into, It's God's communique to us if we want to read it. And it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, how have I not been doing this? Like, what have I been doing with my life? And so immediately, I didn't bring my Bible though, but I was in a hotel room. And in hotels, if you look in the nightstand, they have a handy dandy Gideon Bible. So I grabbed it and I started reading it, or I opened it up at least, and I didn't know where to start. And I remember I was singing, I was like, oh, where should I start? And then I think it was God to this day, is I just started reading in Psalms. And in Psalms, it's all about David, King David, it's all about King David lamenting his heart to God and saying how much he loves him. And saying how much of a rock he is. And my favorite verse is still Psalms 18, 1 through 3. Man, I read it like in my head, as you're reading through it, and I had to say it out loud. My spirit was just so invoked. Just like, yes! Just went into it, and it was rebuilding, I call it. Like, I already had the foundation, but it's just rebuilding kind of more of the structure that was once there and really standing. And I really was kind of rebuilding the relationship that I really hadn't cultivated with God. And just, I want to say like a week or two after I got back, I broke up with my ex. I began seeking God. I remember I even dropped off my friend at work one time, and he worked at a coffee shop, like the local college coffee shop, and I just sat there and I just started reading the Bible and like taking notes, and I was all into it. And I sat there for 3 hours during like his entire work shift, because he worked like the rush shift at night, and so I just read the whole a bunch of stuff and just read the whole time, and I really was really seeking in the whys and the whats, and I got into it, and God has really been molding my heart for greater, and that is the beginning of what I kind of started with, how he got to me then, how he kept me when I was questioning, and when I fell away, knowing I was falling away, how he pulled me back by just saying he loves me. So during this time, during right now when, COVID-19 is spreading everywhere, if I can deal with life or death situations every day as a child because of Jesus, if I can stick with him because I know that he's God and he loves me during thick and thin, when I sin or not sin, when I'm good or bad, when the world is going crazy or if I'm going crazy, God will always love me. He'll always love you. So my testimony is that don't live in fear, and don't live in fear of God, that he doesn't love you, because I promise you, he's coming from a sinner myself, he does. So guys, this is my testimony. And if any of you guys would like to share your testimonies, I would actually love to include a video one day of I want to do a bunch of videos about people's testimonies, because I do believe it's one of the most impactful gospels you can tell, is how God got you. how you found him, how he found you. It's very powerful. So if you would like to talk about it in the comments or would like to email me or anything, just please feel free to do it. I think this is important. And if you guys liked this one or if you have any thoughts about it, I'd like to hear. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and God bless.